I want to give a little trigger warning here. This particular episode talks about something called genetic sexual attraction. I want to make it clear that this is very different from sexual abuse. Remember, minors cannot give sexual consent. If you're a victim of sexual abuse or sexual assault, please call the National Sexual Assault Hotline. That's 800-656-HOPE. 800-656-4673. They can direct you to support services in your area. Human mating. We have the widest range of sexual behaviors of any primate. Evolution seems to have wired us with few rules. Oh, except that big one. Don't have sex with your brother or sister. Ew, right? Then why does it happen sometimes? Welcome to Mating Matters, the podcast that looks at human behavior through a lens of evolution and human mating strategy. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh with producer Brooke Peterson. In this episode, Accidental Incest, we look at the psychological phenomenon that can override Mother Nature's programmed aversion to incest and even draw brothers and sisters, or parents and children, together. Strap on your seatbelts, folks. You're about to learn about genetic sexual attraction and how you might accidentally become a victim of it.
You know, I was a staple in my church. I owned a business, was doing real well on the surface.
That was what horrified me, because the sexual fantasies happened virtually overnight. Within 24 hours of meeting him, I would say they were hypersexual feelings, and it alarmed me because I know that this guy's my brother. Why am I having these feelings?
I knew it was wrong, and I knew I was hurting her, but I just couldn't seem, neither one of us seemed to be able to keep our hands off each other if we were around each other, and the opportunity arose. I hated myself, but I knew that I loved her in the way that I shouldn't love her.
It's very interesting because some of the cases that people will intellectually recognize that it's wrong, and they know it's wrong, and they know this is a bad thing for them to do, but the need for that bond is so powerful, it overrides it.
So many people have been devastated and hurt. So many lives have been damaged.
Okay, now, before you judge, let's put an academic eye on familial mating. And I'm not going to walk this walk alone either. I've got a friend and colleague who has 2 PhDs and is all over this stuff.
I'm Kevin Volkin, and I am a professor at California State University, Channel Islands, where I've been for the past 16 years. And before that, I was director of assessment at Harvard Medical School and lecturer in medical education. And I have a bunch of degrees in psychology. I'm a licensed psychologist. I have a Master of Public Health degree from Harvard School of Public Health. One of my main research areas is in atypical psychopathologies, or I like to call as culture-bound syndromes and bizarre behaviors. I like the stuff that falls in between the cracks.
In your blog, you write a blog called Bizarre Behaviors and Culture-Bound Syndromes. You feature a young German couple who are brother and sister and have 2 children.
Yeah. Patrick and Susan, yes.
With disabilities.
Yes.
And they claim that has nothing to do with...
Yeah. But, there's a case of a man and his grandmother, which is one of the weirdest ones out there because there's a huge age difference as well. But there are all sorts of weird cases out there of this kind of stuff.
Let's talk about evolutionary psychology and why there is an incest taboo, first of all, in most human cultures.
Okay, well, I mean, the simple thing is incest taboo when you have people who are genetically highly related and they mate with each other, they produce offsprings. What happens is recessive genes can now become to the fore, and people can have all sorts of problems. And that we know throughout history that there's been documented cases of this. You can go back to ancient Egypt, where the pharaohs would marry their sisters and they would have all sorts of genetic problems. And I think even some stuff they've gone and they've looked at the mummies or whatever, and they've been able to tell certain things. You can go look at the British royal family, the royal families in Europe who intermarried quite a bit and had all sorts of problems, Mad King George and lots of hemophiliacs and things like that. You can look in more close to where relatives of my mom's family came from, Appalachia. Of course, there's a history there of these so-called blue people. Because the communities are very isolated and, they weren't able to really marry outside. So there's a lot of intermarriage. And so what happens is over the years, these people inherited some sort of change, I think is in the hemoglobin. So they would have a kind of a blue tinge to them.
When a couple is too genetically matched, the outcomes for their children can include birth defects, congenital abnormalities, hearing or vision impairment, mental retardation, learning disabilities, epilepsy, a blood disorder like sickle cell anemia, or even unexplained infant death. Despite these risks, consanguineous marriage, that is, a union between two people who are related as second cousins or closer, is actually considered traditional and is well respected in many communities of North Africa, the Middle East, and West Asia, and in some immigrant communities in the West.
In mostly Pakistani and Bangladesh families in the UK, they have a tradition of marrying their first cousins. And they are finding now lots of genetic abnormalities and recessive genes coming to the fore that cause a lot of problems. So if you think about it evolutionarily, this does not confer fitness.
If the evolutionary outcomes aren't good, why are these mating patterns sometimes culturally condoned? Well, if you remember an earlier episode of Mating Matters, Mothers, MILFs, and Wives, we are cooperative breeders. Group survival is as important as individual survival. Marrying a cousin actually strengthens family ties. It helps enforce and teach cultural values. Financial matters are so much more easily conducted between family members, and sadly, in dangerous patriarchal societies, it can be safer for women to not go far from their family of origin.
Typically what happens is that you find that in cultures where you want to keep the property in the family, okay? So if you look at the royal families of Europe, you want to keep the property, and I would say property, and I would probably extend that to power and property in the family, then you marry within the family, right? So, kings would marry their cousins, you would get alliances between things, it also theoretically should have helped prevent some wars like World War I and World War II. Didn't work out, but the idea there is that, that you consolidate power. So, hey, if we get in a war that, we're really kind of warring against ourselves.
Sometimes marrying a cousin has been simply because of a terrible mating marketplace.
The other thing, you see it where there's populations that are isolated, and there really isn't much choice about who you're going to marry. And people end up marrying people who are close to them.
I come from an island. My grandmother told me when I was a little girl, because I found out that my grandparents are third cousins. Mm-hmm. And she said, first cousins, you can never marry. Second cousins, Third cousins, you're fine.
Yeah.
She said.
No, that's right.
Cousins and island life aside, there are two marital relationships that are culturally frowned upon in nearly every culture in the world, and that is sex and procreation between a brother and a sister and a parent and their offspring. In general, brothers and sisters and parents and their children naturally disgust each other when it comes to sexual attraction. This has been known for a long time. Back in 1891, a Finnish sociologist known as the first Darwin sociologist, Edvard Westermark, proposed a kind of genetic sexual theory. Now remember, humans are wired to psychologically attach to secure figures as infants and young children. Westermark proposed, though, that while we're designed to bond, we're also designed to not become sexually attracted to people with whom we grew up with. Known as the Westermark effect, It's a kind of reverse sexual imprinting. It says, when people live in close domestic proximity during the first few years of life, they kind of become desensitized to sexual attraction. Now, I should pause here to acknowledge that sometimes unwanted sexual activity does happen within a family. That's not what we're talking about here. That's all psychological, and it debunks the Westermarck effect. That kind of sex is usually not mutual, and there's often a threat or coercion associated with it. That's called sexual abuse, and it's usually the result of some other mental, physical, or family trauma. Okay, so according to Dr. Kevin Volkan, Westermarck's theory, the one that says Mother Nature creates a protective sexual barrier between family members, has been validated in plenty of recent studies, including children raised in collective communities.
Children raised in the Israeli kibbutz system rarely, when they became adults, rarely married each other.
Even though they weren't biological brothers or
sisters. Even though they're not biological brothers and sisters, but they were raised all communally as if they were brothers and sisters. And they found that if the kids were raised from a very early age, that they would not enter into romantic relationships when they became older. And so one of the ideas here was there's something that we're programmed that if we're around some person very early on in our very early stages of development, that we developed a sort of incest taboo, right? When they get older. Now, they found some very interesting things about this. If you were on a kibbutz, and let's say your family moved there when you were 11, and then you were hanging out with all the other kids who'd been growing up there the whole time, but you got there later. And now you turn 17, 18. Now you really, that reverse imprinting's really not there. And so you find couples forming from commune kids because one of them came later, right? They weren't there in the early stages. So this is some early stage development stuff where this occurs. The other thing that's found out more recently that it seems like, and this is not surprising, it seems like that females are the ones who are mediating the Westermarck effect. In other words, the females are doing the choosing or the not choosing. That the females are because guys will do anything with whatever. Women on the other hand have to be more choosy, and because they're going to carry the babies, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems like the effect is mediated by the women, and there's some evidence now that the effect is mediated by sense of smell. That when you're raised...
We had a geneticist on our podcast recently who talked about the genes surrounding immune systems, and that we tend to have the most passionate and most exciting sex with people who have very different immune systems from ours. That's because immune systems combine to make a stronger human.
That's right.
So I want to be honest, and I'll be the first on record to say this. I have only 2 brothers, no sisters. My brothers stink. I'm sorry. They're in a million years, I would not go near them in a sexual way. But when you mix siblings not raised together in early life with a psychological attachment injury, that is an unmitigated longing for a lost bond, you can unknowingly become primed for something called genetic sexual attraction.
Or GSA, usually abbreviated as GSA. And this is something that sort of, it sort of started entering into the sort of media, I would say, in the last 10, 20 years, because you had a woman whose name was Barbara Gagnon, who met up with a son that she had given up for adoption at a young age, and met back up with him when she was an adult and he was an adult. And they had this very strong attraction to each other. And she noticed this and, had to actually fight this attraction from becoming something sexual, and then went on to write a book about this. And then as a result, she got introduced to people who also had been adopted out as kids and then met up as adults with either a parent or a sibling and had this intense attraction to this highly related family member as an adult. And in some cases, these turned into full-blown romantic, intimate relationships. Other cases, the people were able to sort of realize it and step back. But they all describe a similar sort of phenomenon where the attraction is almost overwhelming. It's incredibly, incredibly powerful.
Since the 1980s, Barbara Gagnon founded Truth Seekers in Adoption in Chicago to support adoptees and their newfound relatives, and an online community for education and prevention called the GSAforum.com. Yeah, there's an online community for this. Genetic sexual attraction. Now, I want to be very clear here. Widespread studies have not been done to qualify GSA as an actual psychological or medical diagnosis. But there are many, many anecdotal reports and traffic on the GSAforum.com as more and more people reach out for support for this unspeakable tragedy.
Good afternoon. My name is Rambanita. I'm speaking to you from Australia. I'm 58 years old, a grandmother. I'm an artist, and since 2007, I have written for the Genetic Sexual Attraction forums, the GSA forums, because I experienced the phenomenon myself.
Take me back and tell me about your genetic sexual attraction, and let's start by talking about how you got separated from a sibling.
I was raised in Australia, but I was born in Austria. My mother came to Australia when I was 3 years old, and she essentially cut herself off from the rest of my family. I never met my father, and I grew up in Australia without any contact whatsoever with brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles. I had no experience of grandparents, so it was very much just her and I. She didn't cope well with my coming into the world and pretty much rejected me from birth, although I did grow up side by side to her. When I was 44 years old, she threw me out of her life, and I was in a very, very vulnerable situation because I lost my sense of identity entirely when she told me that I wasn't her child. Now, biologically, I was her child, but she disowned me.
Reeling from the rejection by her mother, Rambanita began a quest to find her father.
It was a very long journey, and I eventually made contact with his second wife, who had had 2 sons. And it was a shock to me that I actually had any siblings at all, and I ardently pursued a connection with them. About 2 years later, one of the sons reciprocated my attempts at communication, and I was immediately struck with very unusual feelings. And that had me researching incest within days, because I was overwhelmed with a feeling like I'd suddenly met my soulmate. The feelings of GSA are exactly the same as if you've fallen in the deepest love you can possibly imagine. This person presents themselves in your life. They think like you. They seem to be so incredibly interested in you. You know that there's a genetic connection, but you can't connect to that genetic connection. You only connect to that person as you would to a lover. It wells up in you. You become obsessed. You want to touch them. You want to smell them. You want to be as close to them as possible. You can't. It's like an obsession. You just can't get them out of your mind. And it disturbs you because intellectually you're saying to yourself, oh my God, this is my brother, this is my mother, this is my father, whatever it is. But emotionally, because you're an adult, you respond to this person as you would an adult member of the opposite sex, and you literally fall in love.
In Rambanita's case, the love affair with her half-brother went unrequited, and instead unearthed a well of longing that showed up as erotic fantasies that plagued her dream and waking life. Desperate for help, she turned to the internet.
So I basically Googled, oh my God, I want to have sex with my brother.
Rambanita's healing began when she connected with others whose lives were torn apart by the same phenomenon.
I realized that there were other people like me. And the more I delved into the forum, the more I understood that this is actually a case of missed bonding. It's a case of I've never grown up with this this boy, he's part of my genetic equation, and yet we haven't been able to do the normal things. So, for example, young children play in the bath together. You know, they're very sensual in a very innocent way, and we were denied any of that. So I was looking to bond, and I got that. That clicked for me.
In the end, becoming educated about the syndrome and intellectually processing her feelings helped her escape her own delusions.
The more I accepted the fact that this is a phenomena and it's not real, it's acting like love, the more I was able to release myself from the obsessive feelings, and eventually the obsessive hypersexual thoughts turned into, oh my God, what am I thinking? Once I'd bonded, once I'd gotten to the point where, yes, this is my brother, I know he's my brother, suddenly the idea of having sex with him became absolutely repulsive. And that's what we call on the forum normalizing.
But others who suffer from genetic sexual attraction aren't as fortunate as Rambanita. Their experience causes lifelong pain and suffering.
If I could drink it, snort it, pop it, smoke it, and if it numbed me, I wanted to be numb, because numb was the only time that I felt okay.
This man goes by the name Cedar Forrest. As a recovered addict, he's now dedicated his life to helping others. Like Rambanita, he hopes to warn people about the unknown dangers of GSA and help heal those who have been seduced by it. His own story is heartbreaking. Born in rural Tennessee in 1951 to a World War II veteran who suffered from mental illness, his family dysfunction included violence, alcoholism, and a revolving door of mother figures.
If you want to know how your father can be married to two of your aunts and a third aunt be the mother of your sister and no one get arrested, then come and hear my story.
When he was young, Cedar's parents separated, but he didn't stay with his mother for long.
My father, he came and rescued me from my mother, because when my mother and father separated, she took all 4 children, but the state took the older 2, and because my mother was pretty wild. And Daddy came and rescued me because, well, frankly, I think I represented free farm labor.
Living with his father in extreme rural poverty, Cedar felt isolated and ashamed. He told me he couldn't even have friends over because they didn't have a bathroom or even an outhouse.
Growing up in that environment, we were pretty much, I guess, shunned by the community. And, it was obvious. I mean, not overtly, but you could cut it with a knife that I was the kid that, parents didn't let their kids play with and stuff like that. And so, I was going to make all these good decisions when I grew up. And I was going to find the perfect little lady, and we was going to join hands and march off into the sunset and live a happy life together. We was going to have the perfect kids and all that kind of stuff. And I got introduced to religion when I was about 15 years old, and that kind of added to my idealism, and it gave me hope.
But it was his dedication to his religious faith, Jehovah's Witness, that accidentally brought him face to face with genetic sexual attraction as he attempted to spread the word door to door.
Well, when I was 18 years old, I went to the housing projects in the city that I lived in, and I was knocking on doors, and this lady that answered the door, once I introduced myself, she just started hugging me and wouldn't let me go, and it turned out it was my mother. And so that's how I met my mother. I was 18 years old, and I met my 5 half-siblings, 2 girls and 3 boys.
The emotional connection was immediate.
When I met this family, it was the 180-degree opposite, because I was the oldest boy of the group, and every one of them, all 5 of them, were born into illegitimacy. There was no man in the picture. And here I come marching into their lives, selling hope and representing something that they've never had. they live in the housing projects, and they're all on the street and stuff like that. The oldest one was like about 14. The youngest one was probably somewhere around 7, something like that, 6 or 7. And, you know, they didn't like their life, but they looked at me as someone coming off a farm whose father owned a farm and, you know, had a father in his life. And they looked at me with ideal eyes like I looked at them with ideal eyes.
But with his 14-year-old half-sister, the feelings became romantic. He fought the feelings for a very long time, until one night their relationship changed forever.
We were all sitting around, and it was a cool evening, and we were all watching TV, and me and this particular half sister was on the couch, and there was a couple of other people on the couch, and it was cool enough to where that she had a blanket over. Everyone on the couch had a blanket over, and she was laying her head in my lap, and her legs she had over 2 other brothers on the other end of a couch. So it was like 4 of us on the couch. But her head was in my lap. I was on one end, and the 2 other brothers was sitting on the other. They were all real small, tiny and stuff, so it wasn't no trouble for us all on the... And I don't know why. I can't tell you what happened. I don't know if it was something we was watching on TV or whatever, or that she was moving her head or whatever, but I got sexually excited. And when I did, now she's got the blanket over and nobody can see what she does, but when that happened, she noticed it and she stuck her hand down in my pants and just grabbed me. And needless to say, that freaked me out, you know, because I was in a dilemma of what do I do? Do I scream, "Why did you do that?" in front of everybody to someone that I just loved so dearly and rat her out? And I knew I couldn't do that. So I resolved that, you know, I took her hand, and again, the cover's over so nobody can see what's going on. And I resolved that I would talk to her about it later when I got a chance. So the next time that we are together, and my intentions was to make things right, it actually went very, very wrong, and we started touching each other. And that went on, I don't know, for months before actual sexual activity. Well, as far as the actual incest happened.
What followed was a 30-year affair where the two would vacillate between longing and loathing.
So it was very rare, we would go sometimes 15 years between that happening, but the obsession never stopped. And the fact that she was the one that I wanted to be with, she was the one that I wanted to share my life with. And then it went to the opposite end. You know, how can you be so sick? How can you be so perverted? So it was a tale of two extremes. I hated myself, but I knew that I loved her in the way that I shouldn't love her.
To medicate his psychological pain, Cedar suffered decades of addiction. Unfortunately, his sister died of cancer before the two could process and heal from their experience. Before she died, trying to make sense of her own childhood trauma, she described the GSA to relatives as rape.
I had no idea what lay ahead of me when I found those 5 little precious individuals in 1969 that I loved so much. And now to see how all that has turned out, of those 5, there's only one that will even speak to me or have anything to do with me.
Now clean and sober, Cedar, along with Rambanita and others, focus on the prevention of GSA by educating people about the possibilities And brave artists and storytellers are beginning to explore the topic of GSA in various forms of media. In 2018, Australian filmmaker Sarah Lamberg tackled the uncomfortable topic in her movie Westermarck Effect. It depicts a torturous love story between a young man named Sam, played by Jaden Denke, and his biological mother Sally, played by filmmaker Lamberg. In the movie, the two characters reunite after 20 years of separation.
You can't deny this. You don't hate this.
Stop it! You have to go.
What? Why?
Just go and never come back.
You don't mean that.
You have no idea.
I need to see you again.
No.
Why? Can I call you?
Sam, I'm your mother.
Here in America, the media went berserk back in 2009 when actress Mackenzie Phillips, daughter of musician John Phillips, wrote a revealing memoir about a lifetime of neglect and drug abuse. But there was more.
She also documented in the book her 10-year-long love affair with her father. She had a sexual love affair with her father.
The year her book came out, she bravely told her story in an interview with talk show host Oprah Winfrey. You can find the full interview on YouTube.
So what happens the next morning after you realize that you've had sex with your father?
If you're me?
Yeah, if you're you.
I boxed it away. I started very early on in my life compartmentalizing, boxing away difficult memories, difficult experiences that I'd had. And this was the mother of all difficult experiences. And
how old were you at this particular time?
I was 17, 18.
These kinds of relationships show what could happen when parents and children don't bond, either because they were separated or because of drugs, neglect, and abuse.
The other way people think about it is, and some of the people who've experienced this will talk about this, is that when they meet up with that long-lost relative as an adult, it sort of reactivates that need for the bonding that they would have had. And that becomes almost like a biological imperative that you want to have that bonding experience. And the fathers will feel that too. The mothers and the sons, fathers and daughters will feel that too. Also, brothers and sisters will feel that.
But just to clarify, Rambanita says the situation that Mackenzie Phillips experienced was a little different.
Mackenzie Phillips, we don't put that into classic GSA. With GSA, the relatives have been separated and they don't know about each other, whereas Mackenzie and her dad knew about each other. And there was, I won't go right into it, but there was a lot of manipulation and there was a lot of other things going on. So we don't call that classic GSA. In literature, the topic has also been explored. A 1997 memoir, The Kiss, by acclaimed author Katherine Harrison, documents a 4-year sexual relationship with her estranged father. The book was hailed by the New York Times as a powerful piece of writing, a testament to evil and hope. In 1997, Harrison talked about her book with the American journalist Charlie Rose on PBS television. You can find the full interview on charlierose.com. During the interview, she explains that her parents had a brief marriage when they were teenagers, but then her father disappeared. She talks about years of longing for her father in his absence.
And a great deal of curiosity. I'd seen him twice, briefly, before I was, when I was 5 and when I was 10. And then there he was. And he seduced me, I think quite intentionally. Although I don't think he didn't care about me. I don't think he didn't love me. But he returned, I think, with the intention of...
Seducing.
Possessing me.
A seduction that became a painful 4-year affair.
For me, raised by the mother that I was raised by and her parents, more by her parents, but having gone through the rejection and abandonment by her, to suddenly have this other parent who was apparently fascinated by me, who told me I was beautiful and desirable, and he wanted me so much that he had to possess me completely, was very powerful for someone like me, who really was somebody incapable at that time of turning down love in any form.
Eventually, Harrison moved in with her father, his wife, and their children. They continued their sexual relationship during this time, and Harrison began to self-harm and contemplate suicide.
So what happens is it's almost like an attachment sort of a thing, right? So they want that attachment so badly, it overrides. They know it's the wrong thing to do. They know it. Other people are going to look down on them. It's going to affect their lives. But they sort of it almost becomes like something like a drug. They can't help themselves.
Could this actually have been genetic sexual attraction? Members of separated families, especially those separated through adoption, are particularly vulnerable to GSA. Rambanita says we all need to pay close attention to what she calls the adoption wound.
Adoption is seen as something as being very, very rosy, but the fact is that adoptees are very distrustful because their mother had to separate herself emotionally from them in vitro. It started in the womb. So as soon as the mother...
Rambanita does say, though, that all adoptions are not the same when it comes to potentially triggering genetic sexual attraction. In recent years, open adoptions have become more common. An open adoption is when the biological family and the adoptive family maintain a connection as the child grows.
In open adoptions, if they've been allowed access to their first mother or their first father, they bond. They are allowed to bond. You know, they can play together, they can cuddle together, they can have all the tactile experiences that young children yearn for from their biological relatives. And then they can go home to their adopted family. So we've never had anyone on the forum who's come from the background of an open adoption. Never, never.
But more people are vulnerable than you might imagine. In the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, with cultural pressure to conform to a storybook nuclear family post-World War II, hundreds of thousands of babies born to single mothers were quietly reallocated by governments and religious organizations. Earlier in this podcast, you might remember that I mentioned that I have two brothers. Well, that's not exactly accurate.
Well, I do want to tell you a story that during this great baby swoop, unbeknownst to my family, my mother had a teenage pregnancy that was tidily taken care of by the Catholic Church.
Wow.
And in recent years, I found my brother, 20 years after my mother's death.
Wow.
And I would describe to people that when we first met, there was an instantaneous not need for personal space that you would use with a stranger.
Yeah.
Like you'd bump each other's shoulder like you would a brother, and that was instantaneous.
Yeah.
I felt that. It was different, very different. Even though I was talking to a stranger and I could feel my brain trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
Trying to make sense of this is a stranger, I would feel myself, touching his arm as I'm making a point and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's a very common phenomenon, actually, when these people meet up. A very, very common phenomenon.
Now, obviously, we all have boundaries and we're in adult relationships and we're grown up, so it's not like it was going to turn into anything sexual. But I was very aware of this experience. Yeah,
and it doesn't happen with everybody. But there's some people, some of the estimates are as high as 50% of people who meet up. But it's not everybody.
Recently, my new brother Mike, as I like to call him, came to visit me in California from Canada. I had found him 6 years ago on the internet after a deathbed disclosure from a family member. When he visited iHeartRadio, producer Brooke Peterson took him into a private studio to ask him an uncomfortable question.
Jumping in, did you have any unusual or unexpected feelings toward her?
No, I did not. And part of that may be my age. I don't know. I think, and I've thought about it since she told me what the objective was. And I guess the biggest thing I can say towards that is Mom would kill me if I did. I'm sure it would be different for other people. No.
In my brother Mike's case, the missing ingredient seems to be an attachment injury. His adoptive family was large and close-knit, and he felt completely loved.
I always knew I was adopted. I was adopted by a Catholic family. brought up a Catholic, and so I always knew both my dad's siblings, which there were 6 of them, and my mom's siblings, which there were 5, them and the kids, the cousins, we were always, together with them. So my adoption was a really good adoption. I was 6 weeks old when I was adopted, so I didn't know any different.
But he's still glad I found him and welcomed him into our family.
I'm a fairly emotional guy, and just to know that they're there and to meet them, to hug them, to know that we share a mother, which is really pretty special. I felt awesome. I really did. It was something that I was 65 when that happened, 6 years ago now. It was such a gift. It was such a gift.
So, if adoption doesn't run in your family, you might think you're safe from GSA. But these days, we have another problem.
So if the great baby swoop that took place in the 40s, 50s, and 60s was one cultural phenomenon that impacted this, today we have something else.
Yes.
We have fertility clinics giving out sperm all day long in the same communities.
Yes. Yeah.
So we have kids, teenagers, young adults, going to high school, college with each other who are half brother and sister and do not know it.
Yes. Yeah.
What's the future danger of this?
The future danger of this, of course, is that genetic sexual attraction will play a role. These people will feel attracted to each other. They'll have some overwhelming attraction, and it'll be due to GSA, and they won't know about it. And so then, of course, they could end up getting married, and then, their kids could have problems. Now, if they're half brother, half sister, that diminishes some of the genetic problems. But there have been cases, by the way, of half brother, half sisters having GSA.
As an extension to how big this problem is, we not only have sperm donors who give over and over and over again, college students making money, and that sperm ends up in one community. We are now finding that for decades, certain fertility doctors have been using their own sperm.
That's right. And in small communities, where, half the people in the community are related to the doctor, right? There's been some very high profile cases of that.
Sperm donation concerns Ramanita too.
We've got one man's sperm can produce hundreds and hundreds of children who'll never know each other in the familial way, who are very vulnerable to meeting as adults. And the worst case scenario is that they meet, they don't even know they're related. They end up in this heady romance because their pheromones have drawn them together, their hormones have drawn them together, and suddenly they find, oh my God, we share the same father.
And one thing I think that's useful is to educate people about GSA. So if you do find yourself in this relationship and you have these feelings, that you'll know that this is something that may not be, there may be a biological component to it, psychobiological component to it. And if you recognize it, you can sort of, hey, wait a minute, it's when you don't recognize it, you just fall into something, it's like a drug. You just fall into love and it overwhelms you, So I agree with you. I think the intellectualization of it can help.
Reach out. There's a lot of people out there that understand you, that speak your language, that are willing to help you with the traditional family crumbling, with sperm donorship, with all the things that go on now. There are becoming more and more and more people that are discovering their siblings, their parents, their children as adults, and they never had the opportunity to bond and connect and go through the Westermark effect. And you're going to be sitting ducks for the potential of GSA to strike you if you don't get educated. And there's people that have stories a whole lot worse than mine, but my story is my story.
Genetic sexual attraction. Who knew? The vulnerable combination of ingredients are an early life attachment injury and reuniting with a close family member who wasn't around in a child's early years. Oh, and if you're the product of a sperm or egg donor, you might want to watch out for those dating apps. Your siblings might look very attractive to you. I want to give a special thanks to our courageous guests who spoke so candidly about a very painful and sensitive topic. Brooke and I did our best to honor your trust. Thanks for listening to Mating Matters. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh. Mating Matters is produced in partnership with iHeartMedia. It is researched, interviewed, and written by me, Dr. Wendy Walsh, and it is edited and produced by Brooke Peterson. You know, people don't learn about podcasts usually by just searching around. They learn about a podcast because somebody who loved that podcast told them about it. So I encourage you to please subscribe, write a review, and more than anything, hit that share button now. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh. If you'd like to contact us, we'd love to hear from you. You can call the Mating Matters voicemail at 323-207-8277. Or you can record a voice memo and email it to us at matingmatters@iheartmedia.com.
The sound was pretty good, eh?